Mongolia is one of the enigmas in the world today. Remote and relatively inaccessible, it's a country which few people from the West have ever visited. For many years, this land, with its tales of horse-riding nomads and caravans of camels, had fascinated me. However, our initial approaches to make a film there met with little success, and the idea only became reality when Professor Owen Lattimore, the Central Asian explorer and Western expert on Mongolia, agreed to help us. His attachment and commitment to this part of the world spans over half a century. As our advisor, he helped us negotiate an agreement with the Mongolians. This agreement made it clear that whilst we could use our own cameraman and sound recordist, we would always be accompanied by an interpreter and a television organizer who would supervise both the subject matter and the shots we took. Since we were the first Western television team to be allowed to make a film in Mongolia, the Mongolians were anxious that we should present the best possible image of their country. The films are the result of two journeys we made with Professor Lattimore, the first in the summer of 1974 and the second in the following winter.
The Mongolian People's Republic is the size of all Western Europe and has a population of a little less than 1.5 million. And I remember one day seeing a caravan of camels loaded with wool being led into the station yards at railhead, and the camels kneeling, grunting as they kneeled beside the railway cars, and the loads being taken directly off the camels into the railway wagons. And it struck me dramatically that here was the age of Marco Polo meeting the age of modern steam and industry. And I thought that right then that I would abandon my job and go traveling into that distant background to find out what it was all about. And I've been doing a good deal of that ever since. Mongolia stands near the center of the great zone of migration between the Hungarian plains and the plains of Manchuria and North China. Through it passed also trade routes from India, Tibet, Persia, and the Siberian wilderness, rich in valuable furs. And it was also a part of the great area in which the way of living of the horse-riding nomads developed. The great legend, in which there is a lot of historical truth, that the nomadic way of life provided for the emergence of horse-riding warriors, was not peculiar to the Mongols, and it wasn't invented by Genghis Khan. The same thing existed in the entire nomadic band from Hungary to Manchuria. In warfare, Genghis Khan developed the advantages of Mongolian horse-riding mobility. The mobility of animal property of all kinds was important, because the Mongols had an army which could be followed by flocks and herds and families, including the women. But it is a great mistake to think of the Mongols as primarily a warrior nation. They preferred to live in peace. There is a celebrated birch bark manuscript that was recovered in Russia, in the area invaded by the Mongols, which was written by a Mongol warrior lad far from home, and the song is in alternate stanzas, one to be sung by the son and the other by his mother. The son lamenting his separation from his homeland, and the mother lamenting that she may never see her son again. Now this gives you a sort of human insight into the fact that the conquests of Genghis Khan, which involved so much suffering for other people, also inflicted suffering on the Mongols themselves. We then come to a long period in which the Mongol empires broke up, the power of Mongolia as a state declined, but as sometimes happened, while the state grew weaker, the ruling classes within the state grew stronger, and hence we have a long period of very, well, you can only call it vicious oppression of the people by their own nobility and aristocracy, their feudal nobility. The Mongolian Revolution began in 1921. I was not there at the time, but I was traveling soon after that in regions which had not yet been reached by the revolution. So I can say that though I never saw the revolution itself, I have seen its consequences for nearly 50 years. You might think, seeing people riding horses, milking camels, cows, ewes, goats, that this is an old nation only at the beginning of transformation. On the contrary, the people who are doing these things are also literate people who run their own collectives, which are called nigdals. This nigdal, Freedom Nigdal, supports 3,000 people and 80,000 head of livestock.
Саадалмаа. Нотор ачиг гэж. Ачиг гэж. Барьж гарч. Юмгүй барьж. Зүйл бооход. За шууд барих барьж чинь. Богра сэтэй хашаа байж. Хаш шүтээ хаш. Гажиг шаттай. Потом стартай. Асууд. Манат.
Тодорхойлсон гэдэгээрээ.
Онохгүй ягаа нөгөө суудагшгаа. Битүү нар битүү. За чи гарч. Бач. Тугаар гарч. Ийм нараа. За.
За тэгэхээр энэ хоолтос золон модлог гэд хоолын хэсгүүд одоо ямар янзтай байна вэ? Одоо ингээ харцгаа микроскопоор. За эхлээд микроскопныхаа гэрлийг тохируулаад. За одоо харцгаа. За энэ яа гэж юм. За босч байгаа. За ингэж аа. За тийм хар гэрлээ тохируулнаа. Модлог гэдэг нь ямар янзтай маргаж байна. Дараа зурган дээр ч гэсэн харагдаж байгаа шүү дээ, тийм ээ. Ямар янзтай маргаж байна. За нүг заман тухайтар гээл дээ.
Эсүүд харагдаж байна.
За эсүүд нь ямар янзтай юм байна?
Нарийнхан нөхтэй гуурсан gibi.
За маш зөв. За нарийнхан гуурс нөхтэй маргаж байна, тийм ээ. За тэгэхээр энэ гуурс чи ямар учиртай вэ? Энэ нөхтэй одоо гуурстай маргаж байна гэж байна, тийм ээ. За энэ ямар учиртай вэ гэх юм бэ? Яагаад гуурстай нөхтэй байгаа? За нүг ингээ хэлдэг.
Энэ гуурсаар бол арган нөхөд эрдэстээс өөдөөрөө дамжлах.
За.
From the time they are 8, all the children of the collective go to the Nigdil school. Those whose camps are too far away board at school during the term.
Чиний нэрхэн гинэ? Чи ямар айлын худайл нөө? Худаа. Тэгээд худын хончин айл уу, ухчин айл, тэмчин айл ямар айл? Ухчин. Чи ухр сайд чадна уу? Чадна уу? Чиний сайд. Тэгэхээр сүлээр их болсон юу хийнэ? Ямар мэрэгчл судлана? Багси. Жирас 9 литр суусан.
Жирас 9 тэгэж үнэ бол
Үнэ жилдэн 270 литр суусан.
хоны яма
Ямаанаас 18, 15-аас 18 литр суусан.
гүү юу?
Гүү 60 литр суусан.
Гарны нэг жил.
Тий.
Ханы сум нэгдэл жирийн сум нэгдэл байна уу харин өөр нэгдлээс баян байна.
Манайх их баян нэгдлээ.
Баян нэгдэл. Одоо бас үлдбэрнэ.
Үйлдвэр сайтай малынхаа үйлдвэрийг сайжруулсан 5 тэрэлтэй юм байна. Өрн юм л хөдөг манайд бараг 300-га дөрөв юм.
юм байна.
Тий.
Багсан уу?
Их олон бий.
Тэгээд юу
Малос усаар хангалттай байна. Тий. Усан сангууд ус хөдөггүй газар усан сангууд байна.
In this Nigdo, as everywhere else in Mongolia, the transition from the old method of pasturing animals under the authoritarian control of nobles and clergy was a transition that paid a human cost. People knew that they wanted to get rid of the old before they were quite sure about the methods of the new. And like every country that has gone through the process of collectivization, there was an early period in which the enthusiasts went too far. And this resulted not only in losses, but in some areas of Mongolia in actual uprisings, which were exploited by those members of the old society who wanted the new society not to succeed. They got over this period of excess in a famous new policy of the early 1930s, which was called the New Turn. And they restrained the extremists who were going too fast and went over to a system of persuasion and education. I know myself families which in this second period of transition held out from the collectives. But they weren't forced in. They were allowed to continue. And the real turning point was when such families found that the people in the collectives were doing better than the people who were hanging on to their private herds.